Interstellar, 2014, by Christopher Nolan. The film is not just a spectacular science fiction blockbuster, it stages several social dynamics, power relations, ideologies, and collective imaginaries that are highly revealing, especially when placed in the context of the 2010s and within the long tradition of American cinema dealing with ecological and civilizational crisis. Ecological crisis and depoliticization of the catastrophe appear clearly in the movie. The film depicts a suffocating Earth ravaged by blight, crop rot, and permanent dust storms, without ever clearly naming the culprit: industrial capitalism, intensive agriculture, CO2 emissions, etc. It is a catastrophe that fell from the sky, almost naturalized. This matches a very common pattern in mainstream Hollywood cinema. The ecological crisis becomes an external fatality rather than the consequence of specific social and economic relations. The film thus avoids any direct challenge to the productivist system and shifts the solution toward technoscience and space exploration, classic American techno-optimism. Another main sociological point to consider is the return of the frontier myth and the salvific individual. Cooper, former NASA pilot turned farmer, who embodies the myth of the American self-made man. He is competent, pragmatic, hands-on, and scientific. He sacrifices his family for the greater good, but mostly to save his daughter. He outclasses institutional experts, Murphy and Brand, through intuition and courage. This is an ultra-common figure in the American imaginary, the frontier hero who saves civilization when institutions fail. The film implicitly opposes official NASA, Plan A, save Earth with a state lie to maintain social order, and clandestine NASA, Plan B, colonize with harsh but salvific truth, which legitimizes a form of techno-scientific disobedience against a state perceived as bureaucratic and deceitful. We need to focus now on another important point: familial love versus utilitarian rationality. The famous speech by Anne Hathaway, "Love is the one thing we can perceive that transcends dimensions," is one of the most sociologically commented. It is opposed to cold rationality: Plan A is a lie, Plan B is utilitarian, sacrifice the few for the species. Primary affective bonds, family, father-daughter love, are the real driver of human action. The film ultimately sides with emotion over pure utilitarian calculation. It's a very conservative anthropological vision. Humans are primarily motivated by particular ties, not by the abstract humanity. This aligns with a classic sociological critique of large-scale altruism: we save our own far more readily than the species. Another must-point to comment is the hegemonic masculinity and relative erasure of women. Despite the strong presence of Murph and Brand, the central hero remains a white, heterosexual family man. Women are associated with intuition, emotion, faith. Brand chooses the planet out of love. Action and command scenes overwhelmingly go to Cooper. Even in a dystopian future, the savior figure remains heavily gendered. Colonial and expansionist imaginary is an important point to focus on. Salvation lies in leaving Earth to colonize another world. The pure frontier myth is transposed into space. Plan B, the birthing babies in vats, a new genesis without initial cultural diversity, is a fantasy of starting over with good genes and a controlled society. Some have read this as a discrete avatar of spatial white flight, fleeing an unlivable Earth to recreate a pure society elsewhere. In summary, Interstellar is not an engaged film, but it is extremely revealing of the anxieties and imagined solutions of a significant part of Western society in the mid-2010s. Fear of ecological collapse, distrust of institutions, quasi-religious faith in individual technoscience, nostalgia for a pioneer America capable of reinventing itself, primacy of family bonds over abstract collective good. In short, it is a film that says a great deal about us, about our salvation narratives. To deepen the discussion of the frontier, it is appropriate to situate Interstellar within the long tradition of the frontier myth, as theorized by the American historian Frederick Jackson Turner in his foundational 1893 essay, The Significance of the Frontier in American History. Turner described the frontier not merely as a geographical line, but as a dynamic sociological process, a space of civilizational regression where complex society dissolves into a primitive organization based on family and the individual, fostering the emergence of a typical American character: pragmatic, egalitarian, individualistic, and antisocial in the sense that it challenges bureaucratic structures. In Nolan's film, this thesis is updated in a spatial context. The devastated Earth represents the corrupt and stagnant East, while infinite space embodies the new frontier, a crucible where the individual, in this case Cooper, the self-taught pilot farmer, breaks free from institutional chains to forge a future for humanity. Sociologically, this myth is not neutral. It is imbued with a liberal conservative ideology that valorizes hegemonic individualism at the expense of collective solidarities. Richard Slotkin, in his analysis of the American Western myth, defines the frontier as a space of unlimited opportunities for the strong, ambitious, and self-sufficient individual who rises to the top through sheer will. Cooper is its archetype. He surpasses NASA scientists through his pioneer intuition, sacrificing his family for a mission that ultimately rests on his personal agency. This narrative obscures underlying power relations, class, race, gender, by naturalizing the white male savior figure as the natural vector of progress. As Greg Grandin notes in The End of the Myth, 2019, the frontier myth has historically served to sublimate America's internal tensions, slavery, inequalities, by projecting them westward, promising unlimited freedom that in reality masks violent conquest. Politically, this reactivation in Interstellar resonates with contemporary issues surrounding the new space frontier, promoted by actors like Elon Musk and SpaceX. In a context of climate crisis and growing inequalities, post-2008, amplified by the COVID-19 pandemic, the film perpetuates an elitist techno-optimism. Instead of reforming terrestrial structures, sustainable agriculture, resource redistribution, it proposes an individualized escape into space, legitimizing extraterrestrial extractive capitalism. This fits into a broader critique of American exceptionalism, where the United States positions itself as the exclusive leader of humanity, as in the film, where NASA operates alone without international cooperation. Today, this translates into debates over space privatization which risk reproducing neo-colonial dynamics. Billionaires like Musk or Bezos envision space as a new Far West for capital accumulation, at the expense of global and equitable governance. This political vision ignores marginalized voices, indigenous, global South, that call for a decolonization of the spatial imaginary, favoring collective approaches over individual heroism. In short, Interstellar reveals how the frontier myth, far from obsolete, fuels a political ideology that prioritizes expansionism over social justice, exacerbating current societal fractures such as anti-institutional populism or climate skepticism. To further densify the colonialist aspect, Interstellar can be analyzed through the lens of astrocolonialism. Astrocolonialism, an emerging concept in anthropology and post-colonial studies that examines how discourses on space exploration perpetuate terrestrial imperial logics. As anthropologist Willie Lempert explains, space projects are not breaks with colonial history but uninterrupted continuations of settler colonialism and resource extraction processes, entangled in time knots that link the age of discovery to the space age. In the film Plan B, colonizing a new planet via embryos in vats, evokes an artificial genesis, a pure restart that erases cultural and historical diversity, echoing the purifying fantasies of European colonialism, conquering a void terra nullius, to implant an ideal society. This imaginary is deeply colonial. Earth is depicted as exhausted and unlivable, justifying exodus to distant worlds, a narrative that masks human responsibility for ecological degradation. Some people think Interstellar conveys a dangerous fantasy of American colonialism, where the USA monopolizes the right to colonize, reaffirming an imperial exceptionalism that historically legitimized westward expansion as a special divine mission. The film fits into the space opera tradition, a genre that, according to analyses like those of Overland, recycles colonial adventure narratives of imperial expansion, where racial expansion and supremacist competition provide existential meaning to the white individual, at the cost of erasing others, here, potentially unexplored extraterrestrial lifeforms. Sociologically, this reflects a Bourdieusian critique of power fields. Space becomes a new field for accumulating symbolic and economic capital, dominated by Western elites. On the political and current societal level, this expansionist imaginary questions the ethical and practical viability of interstellar colonization in an Anthropocene-marked world. Today, with initiatives like Mars One or Musk's Mars colonization plans, space is sometimes seen by some people as a new frontier for extraction, asteroid mining, reproducing terrestrial inequalities. Global South countries, already victims of historical colonialism, risk exclusion from these benefits, while environmental impacts, space debris, militarization worsen. This touches on debates in spatial post-colonialism. Indigenous voices, through indigenous futurisms, propose alternatives. Politically, it critiques the escapism of elites facing the climate crisis. Rather than investing in a just ecological transition, Green New Deal, Paris Agreement, figures like Musk could promote flight to space, perpetuating a neo-colonialism where save humanity is reduced to a genetic and cultural elite. In 2026, amid escalating geopolitical tensions, USA-China orbital competition, and decolonial movements, Black Lives Matter extended to spatial issues, Interstellar appears as an ideological artifact that, under the guise of survival, legitimizes a policy of infinite expansion, ignoring planetary limits and global justice imperatives. It's now absolutely necessary to say that sociological critiques of Interstellar, 2014, particularly those framing it as a veiled endorsement of space neo-colonialism, probably often miss the film's profound humanistic core and come across as reductive or even willful misreadings. These interpretations tend to project contemporary geopolitical anxieties onto a narrative that's fundamentally optimistic, universalist, and driven by themes of curiosity, familial bonds, and collective redemption. At their heart, these sociological readings argue that Interstellar romanticizes space exploration as an extension of Western, often specifically American imperialism. For instance, the film's white, male-dominated astronaut crew, with Matthew McConaughey's Cooper as the rugged everyman hero, is seen as reinforcing American exceptionalism, where the US alone possesses the ingenuity and grit to save the species, echoing historical patterns of colonial expansion into empty frontiers. The wormhole's convenient placement near Saturn and the quest for habitable planets are interpreted as a manifest destiny fantasy, treating other worlds as blank slates for human settlement without regard for ethical implications or indigenous cosmic perspectives, essentially, neo-colonialism with rockets. Subtle visual cues, like repeated American flags or the NASA program's secrecy, are flagged as propaganda glorifying unilateral action over global cooperation. These points draw from real critiques of sci-fi's settler colonial tropes, where space becomes a stand-in for terraforming exploited lands. They're not entirely baseless in a genre history littered with such undertones, but applying them rigidly to Interstellar feels like forcing a square peg into a round hole. Why? Because the film actively subverts imperialism's hallmarks: conquest, exploitation, dominance, and pivots toward vulnerability, interdependence, and wonder. The critiques ignore the universal anti-nationalist scope. Interstellar isn't a flag-waving tale, it's a story of humanity's peril and ingenuity, not America's. The crisis, blight-ravaged Earth, forces a global collapse where national borders dissolve into irrelevance. Cooper's team includes diverse voices, and Hathaway's Dr. Brand, a woman leading the charge, David Giasai's Romilly, a black physicist, and the solution hinges on transcending ego and borders via the wormhole's gift from future humans. Conquest? Hardly, it's about humility and failure. Neo-colonialism thrives on domination, but Interstellar is riddled with humility. The Lazarus missions fail spectacularly, Dr. Mann's betrayal is a gut-punch indictment of selfish pioneering. And the Plan a Colony ship is a desperate Hail Mary, not a triumphant land grab. Planets aren't claimed but endured, Miller's Frozen Hell, Mann's Barren Rock, highlighting exploration's brutal costs, not glory. The bulk beings, future humans, aren't conquerors, they're evolved collaborators closing the loop on their own past mistakes. To call this settler cinema ignores how the film critiques harshly unchecked ambition, positioning science as a tool for amends, not empire. These critiques, if any, sideline the emotional and philosophical heart of the movie. These reads treat the plot as allegory for geopolitics while glossing over the film's radical emotional core: love as a quantifiable force, the ghost in the bookshelf, that crosses space-time with gravity. This isn't macho manifest destiny, it's a meditation on parental sacrifice, with Cooper's arc driven by his daughter Murph's unresolved grief, not territorial urges. We must not ignore how the film uses archetypal figures to universalize the human condition. Farmer father as everyman, not cowboy colonizer. In a genre often accused of escapism, Interstellar grounds its spectacle in raw vulnerability, making colonial projections feel like intellectual overreach. In short, these critiques don't work because they prioritize ideological entries over narrative nuance, turning a film that challenges despair into a scapegoat for systemic flaws. There may be disgraceful not for existing, critique is vital, but for pathologizing wonder in an era craving it, dismissing a story that says, we can escape our messes through curiosity, science, love, and passion. And now, let's focus on another very important point: Interstellar as hymn, exploration, science, truth, home, and salvation. Strip away the projections, and Interstellar reveals itself as a secular spiritual symphony to what makes us human. It's no accident Nolan scored it with organ swells evoking cathedrals. This is a modern oratorio for the species. Exploration as pure curiosity dominates the movie. The wormhole isn't a conquest portal, it's an invitation to the unknown, a miracle that humbles the explorers. Scenes like the Tesseract, where Cooper witnesses all of time, aren't about mapping territory but marveling at existence's fragility. This echoes real science's ethos. NASA's Voyager probes, launched with golden records for any listeners, embody outreach, not invasion. Science as truth-seeking beacon is at the heart of the movie. Grounded in Thorne's relativity, black holes rendered with equation-accurate visuals, the film worships empiricism without deifying it. Equations solve the gravity crisis, but they're animated by human ingenuity. The bulk beings aren't gods or aliens, but us, iterating toward truth. It's a rejection of dogma, showing science as iterative failure, failed crops, botched missions, yielding breakthroughs. Research of home is so present that any other consideration seems petty in comparison. There is a nostalgia's pull. There is a search for the irreplaceable gravity of family and planet. Cooper's dust-choked farm, the bookshelf Morse code, these evoke a collective yearning for roots amid exile. The film's genius is framing space as a detour back to Earth, not abandonment, with the O'Neill cylinder as a rebuilt Eden. The film emphasized salvation through love and sacrifice. Culminating in transcendence, Interstellar posits salvation not as divine fiat but earned communion, love transcending dimensions, to loop Cooper into his own past. It's redemptive. Humanity saves itself by confronting isolation, fear, despair, and betrayal, Dr. Mann's lie, with radical empathy. As Brand's line goes, we're not meant to save the world, we're meant to leave it, but only to heal and return. Ultimately, Interstellar isn't blind to power's pitfalls, it dramatizes them to exalt our capacity for better. In a world of real existential threats, its message, that exploration fueled by science and love can redeem us, isn't naive escapism. It's a defiant hymn, reminding us why we look up.